Welcome into the ESPN studios for the latest edition of Nothing But Net Philippines. My name is Atayde. We got 10 minutes together to go through all of the hoops in and around the NBA, in and around the Philippines, rather, whether it's the NBA or the PBA, which we will get to later on. But to focus on the NBA, we are now being joined by ESPN reporter and one of the greatest members of the Hoop Collective, the one and only Tim MacMahon, joining us. Tim, how you doing, buddy?
Howdy, partner. I appreciate it. I would say the only great member of the Hoop Collective, but that's just me.
I will make sure that Wendy and Bontemps hear about that because as a big fan of the podcast, and I listen to it all the time. The rapport that the three of you guys have on the podcast, is that the same off of it as well when you guys are just hanging out?
No, first of all, we don't hang out. We can't stand each other. I think that comes through on the podcast.
Well, thank you that you are here with me now, and we can build some rapport, and we can start to do this more and more often. I wanted to talk about two teams that are actually kind of close to you right now, proximity-wise. One of them, of course, both of them, rather, coming into the NBA Finals, but not coming out of it as well as they wish that they could. We'll start out with the Boston Celtics. I was reading your article on their, I guess, post-finals and championship hangover. Before you got to talk to them and speak to the players, we'll get to that in a bit. With your eye test alone, what was your level of panic when you would see them on the court?
Yeah, and really not a level of panic, just because you understand what these guys did last year. Not just all the games, the 68 games that they won during the regular season. It's a huge number.
Mhm.
Cruised to the NBA championship. They didn't have a series go to 6 games. I mean, it was one of the most dominant seasons in NBA history and just such a monumental accomplishment. And then you had, several of them playing, a few of them playing for Team USA. So not only do you have the deep playoff run, you've got a lot of them busy with the national team this summer. And it is human nature. Kristaps Porzingis, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, they all talked a little bit about this the other night. It's hard to have that same level of focus and intensity that they did last season when they were trying to climb a mountain that they had not climbed before than it is kind of the second time around. Now, they also don't think that they can just kind of coast through the regular season,
Mhm.
flip the switch and, hey, okay, here it is. It's playoff time. Let's be the team that we want to be. So they're trying to find, as Porzingis put it, the level of killer instinct that's required to make another championship run. He said, we were Lions last year, and in some games this year, we've been house cats. They don't want to see the house cats anymore.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it sometimes when I'm watching them, they're a prisoner of their own success. You pointed it
Mhm.
out how they kind of steamrolled through everyone and all the way to the championship. When you see them now, and talking to them, do you feel like they have realized that they are not that way anymore, that they have to have that killer instinct that KP was talking about?
Well, and they are very confident they still can be that team. They still can be the best team in the league. They still can defend their title. But again, it's just the level of intensity, the level of focus. They're not as locked in as they were last year. And look,
Hmm.
they just went on a 20-game run where they were 11-9. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's not the level that they're accustomed to. It's not the standard that they've set. And, Jaylen Brown, as he put it, winter always turns into spring. They need to get to spring.
Exactly.
They need to warm up and, be the Celtics that we saw last season for the second half going into the playoffs. And, at this point, honestly, it's not about being the number one seed. That's probably not going to happen with as much of a cushion as the Cavaliers have. But again, they can't have the arrogance, and I don't think they do, but they can't have the arrogance of just thinking, hey, the regular season doesn't matter. Once the playoffs come, boom, we can just snap our fingers and be that team again.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was going to go with my next question is because, I mean, we've seen championship hangovers from decades and decades ago, whether it was Jordan's, hangovers from winning his championships to Shaq in them. But we always see that there's a little bit of a step back and a step forward when we get to the playoffs. Is this the time that Joe Mazzulla starts to pick things up for them post All-Star break?
I don't know if it's something that can come from the coach. I
Okay.
don't know that Mazzola is I think his focus and intensity is not lagged at all. He only knows one way. I think this is something that has to come from the guys in the locker room, and the fact that they all acknowledge it, the fact they're addressing it. And look, when I saw them in Dallas over the weekend, they just come off a game in Los Angeles that was pretty embarrassing for them. To
Yes.
get blown out by the Lakers on national TV, that's a slap in the face. I think they've had enough slaps in the face, and they need to get back to being kind of the bullies.
Yeah, you got to wake up from all those slaps because at some point it's going to start to hurt. Speaking of feeling some hurt, you're the team that you just talked about right there, the Dallas Mavericks. They've been feeling a whole lot of hurt, both mentally and physically, with Luka Doncic's injuries. How down bad are those Mavericks right now?
Well, look, if the Mavericks are healthy, they absolutely feel like they have a chance to make another run through the West.
Hmm.
That's a huge if at this point, and it's not just Luka Doncic. That's the headliner. He's also the guy who the main guy they're going to get back the soonest. They're hoping before the All-Star break, and they need that first team All NBA version of Luka that you've only seen little glimpses of so far this season, but. They're running out of big men. Daniel Gafford's the last big man standing. Derek Lively the second, unfortunately, is going to be out for at least a couple of months with a stress reaction in his or stress fracture in his ankle. Maxi Kleber has a fractured foot. He's going to be out for a long stretch here. Dwight Powell, a guy who, frankly, was an end of the bench guy, but they need him now. He's going to miss at least a handful more games with this strained hip. Um, so, their injury list has been one that you've kind of had to scroll down on the phone to see the whole thing. Luke is the name at the top, and that's the most important name. But they're not going to be whole again for uh, most of the rest of the regular season, at least.
Yeah, and if you take a look at what happened last year, it was kind of that Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington trade that kind of set them on the right track. And it was a trade that kind of catapulted them into the NBA Finals. With the way that their injury roster looks right now, are we kind of looking at this team to have to do the same thing this trade deadline to get on the right track?
I don't think that they're going to make that. Now, look, the Mavericks will always be aggressive. They're always going
Hmm.
to explore the market. As far as addressing these particular issues, I don't think they give up significant assets to address a temporary problem. Derek Lively II is going to be a huge part of this foundation for years to come. So you're not necessarily giving up assets to try to replace him when you expect him back hopefully by the end of the regular season going into the playoffs. The best possible trade deadline acquisition would be getting an MVP caliber player.
Hmm.
They hope that's going to happen essentially with the return of Luka Doncic. And if Luka is right, he can cover up a lot of flaws. And look, even last year, this team struggled even after the trade deadline. Coming out of the All-Star break, they lost 5 of 6, and then things clicked. They got rolling. They're able to build momentum, carry that into the playoffs. But they did not have home court advantage in a single series last year.
Hmm.
That's a tough road to take, and it looks like it's going to probably have to be a similar path for them this season. Tough road to take, but it's one that they've gone down before.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of movement. Well, hopefully for a lot of us basketball fans that want to stay up late in the Philippines, watching all of our Twitter accounts, making sure that we are able to send them out there. Now, everybody has their eyes on the big names, whether it's Jimmy Butler out there, or whoever, maybe even Zach LaVine
Mhm.
to some extent in Chicago. But are there names right now that are not really at the top in terms of being a marquee name on the poster, but with those that can make a difference for a team right now that might be on the bubble on becoming a real contender for an NBA championship?
Yeah, certainly Cam Johnson in Brooklyn is probably at the top of that list. And, this is a guy, a 6'8" forward who is, I think you can kind of envision plugging into any team because he's not a guy who needs the ball a lot.
Hmm.
Really good shooter, floor spacer, just a high level role player. And won't be cheap. The Nets aren't, it's not like they're having a fire sale. They're asking for a significant price for him, but I think he might be the most impactful non-all-star player who's moved. And then, you can kind of look at who the sellers might be. Obviously, the Washington Wizards, the Utah
Mm-hmm.
Jazz, the teams that are rebuilding. The Jazz are interesting. John Collins has
Mm-hmm.
played awfully well this season,
Yes.
in under those circumstances. There is some interest in him. And then they've got two guards who can be instant offense for a team. Colin Sexton on the younger side, and then
Mm-hmm.
the Philippines fans are obviously very familiar with Jordan Clarkson.
Yes.
And we're talking about a guy who has been a sixth man of the year, a guy who has significant playoff experience, a guy who is a beloved teammate wherever he goes. He's on the wrong side of 30, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that the price would be extraordinarily high for him, but I do think in the right circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
for a team that needs bench scoring, Jordan Clarkson could be a guy who can really help a good team.
I completely agree. I mean, any team that is going to add offensive firepower off of the bench to try and make that push for a nice playoff run would definitely be enjoying that from Jordan Clarkson. Thank you so much to Tim MacMahon for joining us on the show. For everyone that's tuned in right now, make sure you check out the Hoop Collective to join all three, Tim, Windy, and Bontemps on that podcast. Thanks, Tim.
I appreciate it. Adios, amigo.
One more thing before we go. We have 1 week left before the playoffs in the PBA Commissioner's Cup, and the calculators are out trying to figure out the quotients and understand who goes into what situation. Buti na lang, nandyan si Magu Marjon kasi hindi ako magaling mag-math. This is something that Magu does every single conference. Make sure you head on over to his Twitter account and you'll see all the different tie breaks and all that. Also, while you're online, head on over to espn.ph to check out the latest PBA Power Rankings. So, nung nakita ko yung dalawa, I tried to mix both of them together. I saw Magu's potential playoff rankings and the power rankings on espn.ph. And I thought, you know what? Why don't we put them together? So the question that I have is, with how the teams are playing right now, forget everything else, what would be the ideal 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5 matchups in the first round? Paalala lang kasi, twice to beat for number 1 and 2 in the playoffs, and then it's best of 3 series pagdating ng 3, 6, and 4, 5. Para sa akin kasi, I will always, and when I mean always, I will pray to the high heavens to give me a Meralco versus Ginebra matchup any day. 3 games, 5 games, 7 games, 13 games, kung puede. I will take it every single time. And there's a reason why I chose this as my 3-6, because that's where they kind of are right now. But on the power rankings, they are 3 and 4. So they're in good form. There is history there. Meralco, though, have to go through a gauntlet of Ginebra and Magnolia first before they get to the playoffs. So that's why it kind of looks like a 3 versus 6 position would match up between Ginebra and Meralco. And I love it whenever it's an MVP team versus an SMC team. There's always a lot of emotion and rivalry to that. So I am 100% on board with that. Meralco, though, always good. You got Chris Newsom. You got Chris Banchero there, or Banchero. And that is how I see it. I think that 3 and 6 position is great. For the 4 and 5, I want to see Hong Kong Eastern versus Converge. I think that this is going to be a really interesting series. One, because Jordan Heading has an opportunity to become a superstar in this league with a fantastic showing in this playoff series. If he can take over and really distance himself from the rest of the players that might be in his tier level and bring himself up a couple tiers, he can definitely transition himself into becoming one of the superstars in the PBA. And again, I love whenever there's an outside team like Hong Kong Eastern or Converge that make it into the semis. Diba? I mean, you have the SMC teams there. You have the MVP teams there. Northport is there as well. That's going to be interesting to see. But to see an outside team that is an underdog to come in there and make a stand in a semifinal matchup against those bigger teams, that is a must watch series. But if it's going to cost one of them to get there, you know what? If we have to sacrifice one to get one in, we're going to do that. So that's how I see it. My 3 and 6, Meralco and Ginebra, because that's going to be fantastic TV. And 4 and 5, Hong Kong Eastern and Converge. Best of 3 series. That is going to be fun when the playoffs come around. What about you? Let us know in the comment section. What is your dream first round matchup in the PBA Commissioner Cup playoffs? Hit us up in the comments, send in the message, head on over to ESPN.ph for all of your hoops needs. That wraps up things here on Nothing But Net Philippines. I want to say thank you once again to Tim MacMahon for joining us. Thank you to you for hanging out with us. Let's all regroup here next week when we do this one for the 5th time on Nothing But Net Philippines. This is Atayde. We'll see you next time.